one of the first books that I read that I actually remember was so significant for me that I remember where I was when I started reading James Baldwin when I was, I think, a sophomore, maybe in college, I think. And I was
Mhm.
taking this class with this teacher that was, she was so tough. And we read Another Country, the book Another Country. And I remember I was on the 4 train in New York reading Another Country. And I just remember I started crying and was like, this is like one of the most beautiful books I've ever read in my life. I was probably like 21 or 22 years old. And so I remember we read Another Country. We read The Blacker the Berry. I had never read anything that talked about skin color.
Yeah.
In Caribbean Latino culture, there are so many words to talk about whether you're light skin or dark skin, or like I had never ever read like get goosebumps, anything that talked about. And I just remember being like, there's like a whole world that I don't know about. And then at the end of the semester, this professor played recording of MLK speech. It wasn't the big speech that everybody knows. It was the speech that before he died, before he was murdered. Uh,
The Mountaintop.
yeah.
Was it the Mountaintop speech?
And she started crying in the class. And I was,
Yeah.
it was like the moment I'm telling you, this was like I was probably 21 and I remember what I was wearing when she played that. And she said, this is why I teach these classes. And
Mm.
that was like the beginning, I think, of I cried after I left. And I just feel like there were a whole bunch of other moments that I can remember as though they were yesterday. It's been a long time since I was 21 years old. Oh. It's funny. I feel like there's both this feeling that I didn't know them, right? I didn't know these things, and these moments awakened it and I learned, right? And there's also this feeling like I've always known these things, right? That's the sort of somatic part of it that you intellectually I
Mm.
didn't know that this book Another Country, right? I didn't know Giovanni's Room. I didn't know The Fire Next Time. I didn't know those books in my intellect. And yet I remember reading them and being like, yes. And oh my God, this is so beautiful. And you have always known. So it's this like very odd feeling
Yeah.
that our bodies know, right? Our DNA knows. And our spirit knows that is very different than the intellectual knowing that happens. That again, which is why I give credit to my mother, my grandmother, because I feel like that's a different kind of knowing, right? That's about your spirit and your somatic knowing. And that's different than intellectual knowing, which I value intellectual. I'm a big nerd and I read all the time and I take notes like, on all kinds of little paper. But I feel like to do this work, this beautiful work that you're capturing in these stories, it is more than just the intellectual. I have a 1-year-old nephew, and I think a lot about what the world that he's inheriting, climate disaster and potential fascism, right, on the rise. And I guess I would want him to know that there's so many of us out here setting the stage for him and my goddaughter who's 2 and the other babies in my family and your children, for them to take it to the next phase, right? Like this work and these stories are not about me. It is, right? About me and you, but it's about how do we lay the groundwork for the next 50 years of change? Knowing that the pendulum swings back and forth, right? Knowing that there will be another wave of white lash, right? And so, what are the things that you and I and others can do to build resilient systems, our own systems and organizational systems and other types of systems so that he and your children and others can move it to the next phase, right? Because what they're going to be facing is probably going to look quite different than what we see today. We're seeing the beginning, we're seeing the seeds of that. So I would want them to know that we have worked hard, that we're doing our work, that we're coming correct and we are doing our work so that they can take it to the next iteration of what they're going to need to do to continue the work of freedom and liberation.